Good evening and welcome to this episode 18 of the South African Equestrian Federation's podcast, From the Horse's Mouth. Tonight, a topic very near and dear to many of our hearts as parents, but also as competitors and coaches, the topic of safeguarding and the rollout within the SAEF nationally of this program. Tonight in studio, we have our National Safeguarding Officer, Tanya van Meelis. Thank you for joining us tonight, and I want to lead off this episode by reminding everybody that the comments section is free for you to come in to ask any questions that you might have. Let's take advantage of having Tanya in the studio at the moment, so please feel free to ask. If you're struggling to leave a comment, please remember that the comment section requires you to be a subscriber of the channel. You can always subscribe and then unsubscribe at the end of the episode. Don't do that. Stay. Okay, Tanya, thank you so much for joining us tonight. Tanya, before we kick off, how did you get involved with safeguarding?
So quite by chance, I was sitting at a dressage show, in fact, chatting to somebody who does work for SAEF, and we were talking about how people don't volunteer to help and make things better. And I said to her, oh, like what? And she said, well, we need safeguarding people. And I thought, well, I don't even know what safeguarding is. Let me hear. She explained, and I thought, you know what? Why not? It's something that I can do. Yeah, it's important. I can make a difference. And it's a sport that I've done all my life. It's time to give back.
I really love it. I think that's actually an essential part. And, unfortunately, our sport, in an effort to keep fees down, which is something we're all very conscious of, does require a lot of volunteer support. So it's really lovely. And hopefully we'll touch on how people can get more involved themselves. Yeah. What is safeguarding?
If you think of the environment in which we want ourselves, our children, to be able to enjoy equestrian sport, we want an environment where they can flourish, where they can develop, where they're free from harm and they're free from abuse. Safeguarding is just a range of mechanisms we use to help make sure that they can flourish and not be harmed.
And I mean, it speaks to common sense why it's important. But why is it important for that environment to be a safe one?
So the level of abuse in sport is actually very high, much higher than any of us know, and I think it's not talked about enough. A recent survey was done in 6 European countries, over 10,000 participants, and the findings were that 65% of people, when they were children, experienced psychological abuse, psychological violence in sport specifically. 20%, that's 1 in 5, experienced sexual violence in sport, and that was across swimming, volleyball, a range of sports. So to think that it's not happening in any of our sports is naive.
Absolutely.
We just don't know the extent of it yet.
And I mean, obviously, at the moment, we're just touching on children, but there's a whole range of vulnerable adults who would also experience harassment, bullying, any of that. I mean, that all, I assume, falls under the umbrella of the safeguarding.
Absolutely. So it's vulnerable adults, but it could be, for example, safeguarding would look at issues of racism. Potentially you cover grooms, which is important. If you're looking at the people, the most vulnerable group from our survey is women who are 18 to 24. So it's not children.
Wow.
It's young adults.
Sure.
So we have to keep our eyes open and be alert.
Absolutely. So when it comes to safeguarding, who does it affect and who should do what in the safeguarding sphere?
So it affects us all. Safeguarding is everybody's business. So I'll give a small example. I go with my child to a yard. Do I know who the coach is? Have I met the coach? Do I know whether they've got any kind of policies in place, or if something happens where my child can complain, where I can complain? Do I know that they're meeting the basic safety requirements for riding, but that the teacher is also not going to be abusive and screaming at the children, as an example? So that's as a parent. As a child, are you treating your fellow riders with respect? Are you teaching your coaches with respect? Is there cyberbullying going on? So they need to be aware of that.
I know a few coaches who could probably lodge complaints against parents as well.
But that is a safeguarding issue,
okay,
actually.
That's fantastic.
Safeguarding safeguards people against abuse.
That's lovely. That's really, it's lovely to think in the broader spectrum of things where this is really going to go, Tanya. Where are we in the rollout in SAEF of this?
So it's early days still. I was appointed at the end of last year, and we've got a very small committee with fantastic people. We've been trained. but there are only 4 safeguarding officers for SAEF.
For the whole of South Africa?
For the whole of South Africa. And what we really want is we want 2, preferably a man and a woman, in each province. So I'm unashamedly asking people, if you're interested, to put your names forward for consideration. We've drawn up a plan that contains a number of elements. One is just making sure we've got our policies and our structures in place, and we've worked on the policy. The second area is to say, how do we roll out education and advocacy and make sure that people can use the tools that are there? And the third area is, how do you deal with safeguarding instances?
Yes.
So if somebody makes a report or a
what
complaint...
Happens, meaningfully?
Do you want me to go into what happens then?
Yes, I think let's talk about what is the process for a complaint or if something happens.
So you can complain either directly to National Safeguarding, it would come to me, or you can...
And that's an email address.
It's an email
National
address.
Safeguarding at...
saef.org.za. Or you can report through the Guardian app. And the Guardian app, we partner with them. If you report through them, you will be anonymous. Once we've received a complaint, so it could be a complaint about bullying, it could be a much more serious complaint, we allocate the safeguarding officers to do an investigation. We would, if you are not anonymous, we would ask you to give us more details. If we need more details, we would request an interview. If you wanted to give an interview, if you don't, you don't have to make yourself known. We would then go and interview the alleged perpetrator or the person against whom the complaint is made. And then we write up a report saying, this is a complaint, these are the facts we've received from different parties. We've got to identify, do we think that there's a major continuing threat? So if there is a big threat, then potentially action needs to be taken now to try and minimize the threat.
And what kind of action?
Well, it could be, if the threat is, say, abusive language, okay, so somebody's undermining and belittling students, but on a constant basis, the first thing then would be to go to that coach or person and explain, this is the safeguarding policy. You may not even realize it, but the implications of what you're doing on children's lives and long-term future is actually quite severe.
So it's almost, we joke about workplace sensitivity training, but that's actually going to become a reality. It should as well.
Absolutely. We're not taking a punitive approach from the beginning. It's rather to say, how do we prevent, how do we educate, how do we minimize? But of course, where people are knowingly and continually violating the policy, abusing children or young women as an example, then action will be taken against them. And it would go then from our report with a recommendation, for example, to say, suspend this person from these shows or something, to the Judicial Committee, and then it goes through the SAEF structures.
Okay. So I know when I spoke to The Guardian, we interviewed Mark Hardwick previously, he said that any time that there is a minor involved, it also, in cases of assault, it has to automatically be reported to the police.
Yeah.
Okay.
It has to be. The challenge with adults, our policy now says, report with adults, and we're actually taking that away because some people might not want to go to the police if they're reporting. So you've got an option as an adult, but where the victim is a child, we do have to go to the police.
Okay. And I'm asking this because, of course, you're assuming, this is where the tricky part, and we were discussing this before we started filming. The tricky part of this is obviously also assuming that these coaches and hoping that they are registered with their discipline associations. Yeah. And then obviously I'm assuming that the safeguarding has to roll out parallel to the coaching program, which is being instituted by the SAEF.
Yeah.
Okay. Because there have to be some meaningful ramifications for people.
Absolutely. So, for example, the longer term vision is to say coaches have undergone safeguarding training, they know what it's about, and they've had a criminal check and they've had a check against the sexual offences register, and they're clean. And they would then be able to say, I'm an SAEF accredited coach. Okay. Parents could then choose to say, I want to go to you as an SAEF accredited coach, or somebody else.
And it has some weight, it has some meaning. It's okay. That's fantastic. And how long-term is this project? I mean, I know it's a little bit like people say, how long will it take you to back my horse? How long is a piece of string? So assuming everything, we get an influx of people, hopefully after this podcast, of people volunteering to get hands on deck and the coaching program starts rolling out smoothly, what is the timeline looking like? Like, are we looking at this being fully up and functioning within the year? Can people report from now?
People can report from now. So there are aspects of it that have started. To think when everything is going to be gold star running, I actually can't give
I think it's a constantly moving goalpost, to be
Yeah.
fair, Tanya. You know, I think as soon as we get all the coaches accredited, we'll discover something else and have to resolve it like that. The necessity of coaches program being initiated and supported. I want to speak meaningfully about what ramifications are going to happen at the moment for people. The coaches, I suppose, are separate because, as I said, we hope that they're registered with their discipline association and that meaningful action can come through the DAs. Are the DAs on board with this?
So we engaging them on it, and that's still also going to take time.
Okay. If people make a complaint and they want it to be anonymous, I have very mixed feelings on this. We obviously very much want to protect victims, but what stops a coach like me deciding that I'm having a beef with one of my competitors and I anonymously report them? You know, like obviously at some point the complaint can't stay anonymous. It has to. I think I'm asking you a question.
So in reality, if you make a complaint through the Guardian app and you don't give your name and you want to stay anonymous, there is no way at all that we can get your name, that we can get your number.
Okay, so even though you do need a cell phone number to register on the Guardian app, but you don't have access to that.
We don't have access to it. And in fact, the day-to-day operations of the Guardian doesn't have it either. And I'll give a nice example. Somebody had made a complaint. We wrote back saying, can you give a bit more evidence? If you want to interview, please,
So you
let
can
us know.
communicate back and forth anonymously.
If on the app you say that you'll receive notifications.
Oh, great.
So you've got to say you want to receive notifications. I wasn't sure whether the complainant was receiving my emails and just, extending.
They didn't reply.
They didn't reply. So I said to the Guardian, can't you contact the complainant? You don't have to give me the name, the number, anything, and just check that they're getting my messages. They said they cannot. The only time they ever can get a number is if it's an absolutely life-threatening, a teenager ODs, and then says, I've taken whatever, and goodbye. And then they've still got to go through a very strict process on their side. So it's not, oh dear. So in practice, I will never know your name and number if you don't want me to.
So the anonymity is very well protected, but simultaneously, ideally, people will allow themselves to come forward in a meaningful manner in order to resolve these issues.
See, one of the challenges with remaining anonymous is if we ask for a bit more information and we want to get a bit more from you, we can't contact you and we don't know what to do next. So your request for an investigation may not be successful because there may not be enough evidence in what you've written originally for us to investigate. If you do say who you are, you can say, okay, Tanya, you can know who I am and the other DSO, but nobody else. Your name will never go into a report that goes to anybody else. It would only be the two of us, and we can then ask you questions. But most importantly, if we know who you are, you somewhat protect it. So if somebody starts intimidating you because they think you've reported or you have reported, or harassing you or threatening you, we can take action because, in fact, you're not allowed retaliatory action against a person who's made a complaint.
So Tanya, when you do say that, and this is one of the questions that came up in the initial Guardian conversation, what are those actions? Like, how can we meaningfully stop intimidating behavior? Like, are people going to be monitoring? Are stewards meant to be monitoring it in the arena? It shows. Like, what are the environments and how are people going to, like, will people will stewards be told, listen, you have to keep an eye out for this person. Is everyone made aware of the situation? How does it actually look?
Yeah. So if there's a person who has been accused and is particularly problematic, not necessarily found guilty of anything, but we have to try and minimize risk. One way of doing that would be to speak to stewards and saying, just keep an eye out, check that, the person isn't cutting in front of other people in jumps, doing that kind of thing. We also want to try and get safeguarding posters and that up at shows. So if people see something and want to report it immediately, they can.
So see something, say something, do something.
Exactly.
Like, okay.
Exactly. You know, it's not ideal. The stuff that goes on will probably keep going on for a long time. What we really need is everybody's help to say, how do we change the culture in which we all ride, and how do we then report and stop it?
I have to say, Tanya, and maybe I'm being optimistic here, but I hope I disagree with you on the fact that it's going to continue for a long time. I think even the act of this coming into being is a massive thing. It's a massive, just quiet cloud at the back of everyone's mind, we shouldn't need it, but just to behave a little bit and to maybe be a little bit kinder and a little bit nicer. Obviously, I suppose your serious perpetrators are always going to be perpetrators. But in light of conversations like Athlete A is a wonderful documentary about safe sport on Netflix, I really do think we're moving into a much more aware space of things, hopefully.
Absolutely, hopefully. One of the challenges is I think that we've almost normalised a lot of poor practice in the sport.
Absolutely.
So, being an older person, if I think of the sexual jokes, when I was young, I never thought anything of it, and the flirting and all of that. Younger people now are saying, actually, I don't feel like you're coming on to me, and I don't feel like you saying, I must do something and then you'll give me something back.
And there would have been one of your peers who, it went maybe too far with, or who was deeply uncomfortable. But as you say, because of this normalized culture, a lot of the time people feel like they can't say anything, and they either leave the sport, which is terrible.
Absolutely.
Or worse.
Yeah.
Okay.
What I don't want is I don't want people feeling so scared to report that they leave the sport, that the cost of reporting will be so high. The cost of reporting, if you want to remain anonymous, you remain anonymous. Our job is to protect you reporting, but equally so, we've got to be fair and balanced. So if a report is made against a professional, that's their life, that's their livelihood.
Yeah.
We have to make sure that the facts support the case before anything is done. We have to be able to make sure that you as a person accused have a chance to reply
Absolutely.
to all the issues, and that there's a proper due process. So it's really a very considered process.
Yeah, and no, I think it really is important. As we're obviously our primary concern is the victims, but as you say, there is obviously with any channel a little bit of room for abuse for the accused to become the victim. If it's the false accusations are very rare, but it does happen. Yeah. We do have a question saying, how do we know who the people who are abusive are if they've been blacklisted? Sorry, I butchered that slightly. It's bad. So what will the blacklisting or the protocol be for?
So for now, and we're not clear on that yet, now we've been saying it would rather be you positively join a list if you're cleared. What US Equestrian does, for example, is they publish online the names of people, whether they've been found guilty and what the offence was. I don't think we're there yet, but it's something that we can look at, and people must say what they think needs to be done as well.
With the United States, I know as well that they've got a pretty accessible sex offenders registry. Where are we with that in South Africa? Like, how easy is it to find out? And I'm not saying it necessarily needs to come through safeguarding, but how easy is it to find out if your child's coach is on such a registry in South Africa?
So what we'd have to do then is we work through the Guardian app, and potentially ask them. We might have to pay them to do a check.
See. All right. And would that become, hopefully in the future, cursory for all coaches?
Well, what we want to do, for example, as safeguarding officers, we've got to be cleared. A check has to be done for us.
Okay.
So as we roll out, people will voluntarily put their names forward for a check and then be able to say, I'm clear.
That makes total sense. What is the difference, while we're speaking about making a sexual joke or something funny in an environment where it's been funny before? What is the difference between poor practice and abuse?
So it's totally context. If you and I were friends as adults and I told you a dirty joke, we're telling dirty jokes. You know what I mean? Like that, we're not saying don't tell dirty jokes. If I told a particularly vulgar joke, to you as a client in front of a small child, that's poor practice. It's just not what you want to expose smaller children to. So it's really just saying, where can you potentially do harm? And just being a bit hesitant to speak at that point, or to engage in sexual banter when there's small children around. What would be totally inappropriate is for an adult coach to be making jokes with younger children as part of a grooming process, for example.
And I know that the last time I was on a coaching clinic, they've become very mindful about inappropriate contact with people as well. So, and they were saying between your grooms, between riders, between coaches, so saying things, if you were going to make a seat adjustment, and this is, I suppose, where the education will have to come in, was saying, can I touch your foot,
Exactly.
to move your, and having just like, I think once we've also got a clearer mandate in place, perhaps, then these questions stop being quite as relevant.
Yeah. I mean, I think that the idea is not to get everybody so scared that you don't want to say anything, you don't want to touch anybody. It's just putting in a few measures so that people give consent to say, move my leg here or there. In vaulting, there's a lot of hands-on. Just do it with consent.
I think it was really interesting. There was a discussion about it somewhere, I can't remember, and they were saying, like, how do I know what I can say to a colleague anymore? I can't even say, like, hi, beautiful, smile, have a nice day. And the safeguarding officer said, I think a pretty good rule of thumb is, what would you be comfortable with a man in a jail cell saying to you? And I thought that was such a great, like, you talk about context. Like, how could this possibly sound creepy? Oh, okay. Yeah, I get it now, People almost always get it when they're on the receiving end of it.
Yeah, absolutely. I think a lot of it also, intent behind what you say counts.
Yes,
so sometimes
absolutely.
people just say, stuff comes out of our mouths, we say stupid things.
And there's definitely a bit of a generational difference, and I think in today's times, especially on social media, there's such a wide cultural chasm between, like, your so-called boomers and now your exennials, and things have changed so dramatically, and I don't know that we can hold everyone to exactly the same standard. It's a really tricky tightrope. And trying to be fair to everyone, while, again, I have to stress, protecting people from feeling victimized.
Yeah. I think the first step is just being aware of it. So maybe sometimes you won't tell the joke or something anymore. Sometimes it may be inappropriate. But as long as you're thinking about it and aware of the consequences and whether you may be causing harm or not, it's not whether we think stuff is important, it's how the person receiving it
Absolutely
understands it.
And I think that's where the conversation comes in, where you said first you wouldn't immediately rush to disciplinary. It sometimes is as simple as a conversation about saying, do you understand how what you said could be inappropriate? Exactly. Or how that could, and someone might go, oh my gosh, I'm so sorry, I didn't realize.
Yeah. I mean, there really is a big difference between just poor practice and abuse. And abuse is a culmination of poor practice over time. It's deliberate. It's quite predatory, in fact.
Absolutely. Well, absolutely.
In a way, it's easier to find the real predators if you just address poor practice.
Absolutely.
So if you've got an environment where abuse and violence and slagging of colleagues, is there, it's more difficult to say, okay, I see that, this person is really harassing or humiliating somebody, if that's the norm. If it's not the norm, you can say, no, that just doesn't look right, and keep an eye on things. Are we the woke police? There seems to be and I actually like this because someone in the States, there was a recent discussion about this in Congress where they said, well, what is the definition of woke? And it was interesting to see people saying, well, in their opinion, the definition of woke was actually just young people who were very concerned with societal inequalities. So as I ask you that, I don't think being the woke police would be the worst thing in the world, but I am aware that it has a very negative connotation for a lot of perhaps our more established community members. Yeah. We're not the woke police. It's impossible. We don't want to do it. What we want to do is identify where there is potential and where there is real abuse and stop that. It's not an issue of saying, did you use he, she, and all pronouns, and we're not that. The question is, are you going to somebody and using blatantly sexist language to them and humiliating them? That's what we want to stop.
I think it'll be interesting from a diversity perspective as well to take into account gender issues, and to your point, finding out where that line is, for, disrespecting someone's pronouns versus, like how, again, the line of abuse there, I suppose, really comes down to the victim. And from there on, we're going to have to address it. What should parents be looking out for specifically? And I mean, I say parents, but I think also, Tanya, I'd like to say other coaches and other people at the yard and other people in the ecosystem. How can we be aware of what's going wrong?
So I think the first thing is to see how adults or other people are behaving towards your child. And I'll give an example. We were at the yard. I had my daughter with me. Some of the kids were swimming. My daughter goes off and a man goes and sits specifically to go and talk to her. I just think, what grown man finds anything in common with a 12-year-old to go and talk to them specifically? It's not appropriate. Grown men are friendly with grown men. Their interests are the same, not with a 12-year-old. So it's just, that kind of something that you think doesn't feel right, just prick your ears up.
Yeah. Bookmark it.
Yeah. If you watching your children, so are your children changing behavior? Are they becoming more withdrawn? Are their sleeping patterns changing, for example? Are they becoming more talkative about certain things and not about other things? It's difficult because teenagers they lead secret lives anyway.
Absolutely. And I think it can go one of two ways. If your child is in a grooming situation, they can often then be more eager to go to the yard because, they're developing this unhealthy attachment, versus the other end of the spectrum where they now want to sell their horse and give up, for example.
Well, that's exactly, and that's the danger. Because a lot of the abuse, there's a very strong psychological component to it. So a person who's grooming a young person would make them feel fantastic, would make them feel that they are special to this person, would make them feel like they want special time with the person. And it progresses along that line. And I think that's why it's also so difficult for a lot of people to report, because you have a deep emotional attachment to the person who's potentially abusing you. You're enjoying their company. I mean, I'm not saying people enjoy abuse, but abusers identify what you need.
Absolutely.
Yeah, and they zero in on that. And that's what we need to watch out for, is what kind of relationships are there.
If you're in a yard situation where you see another adult that you think is being compromised, what should the protocol be? And this is really slippery, because I'd really like to urge people. I feel very strongly about, if you see something, say something. And sometimes it actually is easier to say something in the moment to shut things down. How easy is it to go and report on somebody else's behalf, especially considering that the other person might not really be aware of the fact that they're in a predatory situation?
See, if you're seeing it and it's happening in front of your face and the person is there, for example. So I'll give an example. I'm with a black person and somebody makes a deeply offensive racist joke. Do I laugh? No. Do I say, actually, I think that's offensive? And that then puts a stop. Immediately puts a stop to it. It's not asking another person to come forward or not. If it's continued abuse over time, then either speak to the person and say, I'm noticing this, is it a problem or not? If they don't think it's a problem and you think it's a problem, then speak to somebody and, see whether it's appropriate to report or not.
Escalate. That's a really great example. Thank you. What, other than reporting, should people do if they are in an unsafe situation, or encourage people in an unsafe situation to do? So I think I'm very passionate about the speaking out in the moment. And for anyone who feels awkward about it, I think that knee-jerk reaction of, oh, that's not very nice. Yeah. And I've got a 6-year-old who sometimes pops out with these words and she'll say, that's not very kind. And it's such a, when you go, oh, sorry,
Exactly.
But from there on, what are the steps? Should people immediately leave a yard? You know, like, should they speak to the owners of the yard, speak to the people who've hired the coaches? How should the progression be, like, other than reporting?
I mean, it's very much on a case-by-case basis. What I would do, you know, people must decide for themselves, is I would try and determine the level of risk. Okay, if I saw, like, the man speaking to my daughter, for example, I thought there was a high risk. Did I leave her there without watching her? No. If I left her there and I wasn't there, I made sure that I fetched her after she had ridden, so she's not spending time. If we were all there and he was there, I would watch him all the time. So the one thing is to try and say, how do you try and avoid a bit of a dangerous situation where you can? What safeguard measures can you put in place to try and protect yourself?
Absolutely.
But if you are in a position of real risk and danger, then report, do something, leave the yard. As a parent, I wouldn't leave my child somewhere where, you know, they were going to be thrown off a wild horse. So why must I leave her with somebody where she may be abused and tormented?
Absolutely. What looking forward to reporting now? If somebody had to report today, we're talking about the long-term rollout, what reasonable outcomes can people expect to have against someone who is marginalizing or abusing them at the moment?
So, depending on how bad the abuse was, if, you know, depending on the evidence that's put forward, I think the first thing would be we would go to the abuser and say, actually, stops now. But what we're going to do is we keep a record of complaints against you. That's fantastic. Okay. So if it happens again with somebody else or even this person, actually a verbal warning is not going to cut it anymore, and it escalates. Some of the predators who move from school to school, I mean, they're horrific stories. People think there's something wrong. It's not always reported, or it's reported and no record is kept. So this now, if complaints is made against you... We've seen it with the water polo
coaches recently.
Exactly.
And it did transpire that it had been a known issue, but because it hadn't been accurately captured, it became a massive problem.
Yeah, that's exactly it.
Yeah, okay. Can we chat a little bit about the survey that SAEF did? I'm quite keen to hear about what the outcomes of that were.
Sure. So we wanted to get an idea of where we should be focusing our work, how much people knew, and thank you to the 750 people who responded to the survey, answered the questions.
750?
750, maybe next time it'll be more.
Absolutely, hopefully, yeah.
I'm pleased with what we've got, because what the survey points to, it points to about 70% of people know what safeguarding is.
That's great.
Fewer people, so it's about 2/3, just under 70, know that you can report anonymously, and a much smaller amount know about the Guardian app. So the first area of focus is just educating people about what it is and what their rights are. But what came out really interestingly is to see where people feel safe and not safe.
Oh, okay.
And who's being bullied the most. So the most vulnerable are 18 to 24-year-olds. They get more bullying, humiliation, inappropriate contact than children or anybody else. So we know
maybe we are watching our children very well. We may be neglecting it now because they're adults.
Yeah. What's nice to see is when we ask people, do you feel safe with your coach? Do you feel safe at your stables? The vast majority of people feel safe with their coaches, feel safe at the stables. Where more people don't feel safe is at shows, which is interesting.
With other people's coaches or with other riders?
You know, that's what we've got to go back and explore.
That's great.
So it was a broad question saying, do you feel safe? And it could be, you know, you might be scared in the warm-up arena, horses coming towards you and you're going to fall off. I mean, people may have interpreted that.
Okay.
Exactly, as opposed to going to the bathroom by yourself or not. But just the fact that 1 in 10 people doesn't feel safe at a show means that we need to do more with the show-holding bodies.
Absolutely.
To try and make sure that they feel safe.
So, I mean, into the ecosystem, as much as we're putting in the coaches, we also have to put in the officials, the stewards, you know, and that training. That's really important. And having enough of those people on the ground, as well as safeguarding officers.
Yeah.
So you are looking actively at the moment to have 2 safeguarding officers in every province throughout South Africa.
Yeah.
They obviously can't be at every show. So what happens? The stewards will get to know them, hopefully, and then stewards report to them as well as
Yeah.
people going directly to them.
Yeah. So for very big shows, for example, I know Mariette already goes and sits there and does some safeguarding stuff. That'll be rolled out a bit more. But maybe we could put just the Guardian app link onto entry forms, for example.
I'm going to drop
So
the Guardian
people-
app link into
Thanks.
the conversation here as well.
People just need to know that if something is going wrong, they can report.
Okay.
Putting posters up at shows. I mean, I'm sure there are, a lot of show-holding bodies and clubs who are more than willing to help ensure that its members and competitors are safe.
Absolutely. I mean, it's best for everybody. This is one of those situations where, we're not gunning, to your point, we're not gunning for anyone. We're just trying to make it let's all be better together kind of vibe, So, I would feel devastated to hear that somebody who I'd made a flippant comment while I'm anxious in a warm-up arena had taken it as bullying. And maybe just being a little bit more aware of that helps us to circumvent that. And again, as you said earlier on, stops people from leaving the sport completely.
Yeah.
We do have a little bit, horse riders have probably a well-earned reputation for not always being the nicest people.
Yeah.
But I think it's because a lot of us exist in total terror half of the time that we're on our horse, to be fair.
But if it's terror of the horse, it's one thing. If it's terror of your fellow competitors or coaches,
No,
it's
absolutely.
another thing.
I just think that sometimes, I remember someone shouting at someone for opening a chip packet at a show. And she said, "Would you eat more quietly?" But it was because her horse, as they opened the chip packet, her horse did this.
Yeah.
And it was just, the person who was eating the chips was someone's dad. He had no idea what had gone on.
Yeah.
So to your point, again, it's context and just understanding this ecosystem. If people want to become national safeguarding or provincial safeguarding officers, what is the process?
So they should contact their province, SAEF in their province, and say that they're interested, and it would go through the province.
And that would just be going to their exco, because we don't have provincial safeguarding at the moment.
No.
So just getting hold of their secretary or...
We've got provincial safeguarding in Mpumalanga,
Okay.
Western Cape and here.
Okay, fantastic.
So,
That's a good start.
But, it's a start.
Okay. I'm assuming KZN would be our next biggest province that also needs to then catch a wake up. And what do people need to do from a training perspective to become a safeguarding officer?
So if you're accepted as being a safeguarding officer, we would then send you on training with the Guardian. And if I tell you, after being trained by the Guardian, I wanted to lock my children up and never let them out. Because we think we know what's going on or what harm can be done. And Mark is just so experienced in all of this that he points to areas that you didn't even think of, that makes you aware of what you should be doing. So you do that training, and then we meet every 2 months at least as a group to go through best practice, to go through...
Wonderful.
Other examples.
And will that training then be available to people like our stewards and coaches in the future? Is that something that we're going to roll out? Is like this educational pack almost?
So there will be educational pack being rolled out, not necessarily with the Guardian. So I know when I'd spoken to Regular, she said there is some online training that's there.
On the Guardian?
No.
Okay.
I'm not sure where.
Okay.
But she said some of the coaches are doing that. We just need to assess that and see how we can roll it out. It also needs to be cost effective and time effective for
Absolutely.
people.
I think the trick with offering anything like this, which you want to offer free, you would love to offer free, is good quality content still needs to be created. So there is always, unfortunately, a cost involved. And hopefully this is where we can all meet together and make it really happen. I have posted the link to theguardian.co.za in the comment section, and you can log onto the Play Store and the Apple Store to download this app, and you just need a cell phone number to register, but the cell phone number is not divulged with anyone and not shared. Your details are completely private. Tanya, is there anything else that you want to add to this? This is obviously, I want to stress this, our very first conversation about rolling out safeguarding. It is by no means complete and no means a perfect process yet, But all the more reason why we need more people to get involved and give us feedback and feel as strongly about this as we do.
And just be aware, the fact that you're asking questions.
Yes.
Potential predators would not target you or your child because they know that you're taking a keen interest.
Exactly. There was a wonderful part of Athlete A, which obviously deals with the women's gymnastics team in the United States. And they spoke, one of the women came forward after many years, and they said to her, why did you choose to come forward now? And it was a bit accusatory, like, well, if it really happened, why? And she said, because I've just realized it's happening to other people.
Yeah.
And that for me was the biggest moment, was going, how many things have we overlooked that we've maybe been strong enough to deal with, but that we've paved the way for a more vulnerable person to be taken advantage of?
Absolutely.
So I do think that's really important. Tanya, thank you for joining us in the studio tonight.
Thank you.
And we're looking forward to, thank you. I see this SAEF has shared the Guardian link. Please get in touch with your provinces if you are keen to become a safeguarding officer and to help make sure that our sport is safe and enjoyable for everyone. This has been the SAEF podcast from the horse's mouth. We look forward to seeing you next week, Wednesday at 7 p.m. again. Thank you for joining us.